I mean, as city forester, I mean, I kind of see that role is encompassed in two larger projects. One is kind of the work of the physical maintenance of the urban forest. You know, that's so maintaining existing trees, pruning, cultivating, removing them, and planting new ones, finding spaces. So that's kind of one half of that job, and the other half is the educational and public relations and gathering and disseminating information, you know, about the urban forest, why it's important, what it's good for. So, I mean, my job is housed in the Parks Department, in the Goshen Parks Department. So, I mean, that's a really important, maybe it's a lens through which I work and through which I am seen. And I guess I say lens because, you know, a Parks Department has a certain perception in a community, and usually that's a good perception. It is here in Goshen, I'm pretty sure. The tree board, which is a board which was created by the city. It's an advisory board to the city council primarily, and I am the city staff person for that board, and really the board has come to function more as an advisory board to me, although they certainly can work directly with city council, but as it's evolved over the 12 years now that I've been in the position, they work much more closely with me, and it's a good relationship. Some of the other organizations, so there's a new not-for-profit now, Trees for Goshen, and I am sort of the primary consultant for that organization, and that organization works to enhance the urban forest throughout the city, not only in public space but also in private space. I mean, so I guess those would be the main kind of organizations I work with. There are also schools that I get involved with, the hospital to various degrees. The hospital makes a yearly donation to the city of trees, of at least 100 trees. You know, so I help to figure out what those trees should be and where they should be planted. So that's that is an important relationship. That's not a small relationship. And I shouldn't skate over the schools either, because we work hard at bringing schools into the Wreath Interpretive Center, so another hat is that I'm also the director of the Wreath Interpretive Center. So that's environmental education, and we don't do nearly as good enough job as the space would warrant and as the need belies, but we're working at it and developing really good relationships with especially Chamberlain and Parkside Elementary. There's been good relationships with the middle school, and working with other classes in other schools too. So yeah, I don't want to skate over that relationship either. It's kind of a constant, right? You know, there's the day-to-day communication aspects of emails and phone calls and texts, and it feels like too many channels sometimes. But then there's also the more there's always the more thoughtful and probably time-consuming kinds of communication that get expressed in either the column that I write, or it could be grant writing. It could be minutes or notes for various kinds of meetings, whether it's tree board or environmental advisory commission work. There are any number of ways in which I find myself almost constantly kind of crafting message about either about trees specifically or urban forestry specifically, but then also more and more about the larger environmental reality of the Goshen community, and the environmental integrity of the community, environmental and or ecological integrity. So I feel like I'm always thinking about communication, not always in now I must communication kind of now I must communicate kind of mode, but always just thinking about the story. So for instance, this morning, as I have been driving around from one thing to the other, I'm thinking about this large American elm tree over on Cundard Road. This is just off of West Wilden, heading out of town, which is a tree that I wrote about several years ago, and got to know the owners of the property where it was growing. It has been cut down now. This is a significant tree, given Dutch elm disease, which kills elm trees, and this one has outlasted almost all of the other American elms in our area, especially ones of its size. And it's been cut down to make room for business development. So I've just been puzzling about how do I communicate, how do I tell the story of the loss of this tree, being sensitive to the business interests that are at work, being sensitive to sort of other cultural norms, but also knowing that in my position and in my heart, I have to push back against some of that, and I have to eulogize this tree in an appropriate way, not in an appropriate way, in a clear way, So that's part of those are some of the things that are always kind of tickling the back of my mind as I'm going about the day. I recognize that it's not always so easy to separate personal from professional. And I should also say that, one of the things that I've discovered, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about my job is the way that over the years it has allowed, I've figured out ways, I've been offered the opportunity to bring my personal interest in writing, in storytelling, into my profession, into my professional work. So personally, I guess I'm continuing to understand my own ethic, ecological ethic, and that work, is constant. And let's see, I'm stumbling around here.
You're welcome to backtrack if you need to. I mean, we'll be
with
this.
Yeah. So story is something that I've always really enjoyed. I think most people really enjoy story. That's why movies are so popular, right? That's why music is. These books, whatever. These are all story. Story is essential to us as humans, individually and culturally. I don't have any doubt about that, and I don't think anybody reasonably does otherwise. And for me, I have always personally enjoyed creating story, especially writing. I have always wanted to think of myself as a writer, and I usually don't. Occasionally, I catch a glimpse of something that makes me think, oh, maybe I'm becoming a writer. So creating story, telling story, having the opportunity to tell story is a really important thing to me, and is one of the most gratifying activities for me. Having the stage, or having the discovering the ability to weave my professional work as a forester into storytelling, or allowing important parts of that work to be storytelling, has also been really, really gratifying for me, personally. And I hope, and I hear from enough other people that it's useful to them too. So that's also gratifying. And maybe even if it was just 2 or 3, that would be enough for me. Am I answering the question at all?
Can you say more maybe about some of that feedback? Just like what comes to mind when you say that?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally I'll get maybe an email, or even a mailed note from somebody who read something in my column that really enjoyed it. I've got I can't remember whether she's a cousin or an aunt. This would be like a second or third cousin or aunt, who 2 or 3 times a year just sends me a note saying that she's read something that she really enjoyed. And that's really the only contact that I have with her. So that's cool. That's gratifying. Or here and there somebody else out in the community. When I've had the opportunity, like at Greencroft, to talk to a group of people to kind of tell some of the story that I've been collecting. There were a number of people who talked to me afterwards and were appreciative of that. So I think there is an audience for the kind of storytelling, the kind of stories that I'm trying to tell. And I suppose it's partly the work of cultivating an audience, but it's also me responding to what I think I'm perceiving from the people that I work for in Goshen, which is an interest in the kind of story that I'm trying to record, and that story has to do with the intersection of human and non-human, which far too often we compartmentalize into these different, even opposing, worlds. And so, part of what I think part of what I'm responding to is, both for me and for others, a real interest, a real desire to understand how those two worlds are not opposed, but are superimposed and interlaced and interconnected. And the urban forest, as I've worked in my position, I've come to realize is, one of the most important ways that gets played out or becomes relevant or realized in our community, but in communities across this country and probably around the world, I would suggest too. My favorite stories tend to be the ones that are under the surface, maybe buried deep beneath the surface. One of my favorite stories is about this older woman over on 12th Street called me, and again, this has been 4 or 5 years ago by now, probably. Wanted me to come look at her tree because it was remarkable to her, and she described it to me. And went over and discovered it was this oak tree. The trunk of it was, I don't know, it was probably 30 inches across. She had moved into the home maybe 2 years prior, and the former property owner had tried to cut this tree down and had succeeded in taking off everything down to down to about 12 feet. So there had been this tall 12-foot stump of an oak tree, but it had not died, and so it had resprouted all over the place. It was just a crazy tangled mess of a tree that refused to die, and it was essentially thriving. It was messed up, but thriving. And she wondered what to do with it, what she could do to help it. So that was how I got to know her. And the tree was remarkable, but it was by no means the most remarkable thing about her, because she's in her 80s. She lives on her own. Has trouble getting around, but she has slowly turned her entire backyard, not a big backyard, but big enough, into this garden, because she'd come off the farm, had to downsize off the farm, and but couldn't give up agriculture, could not give up gardening, and so she'd newspapered everything and kind of made a lasagna garden, piled the mulch and the compost on top, and she had raspberries and blackberries and strawberries and blueberries, just everywhere, and beans and squash and tomatoes and peas and cucumbers. And flowers, just wild and crazy. Well beyond her ability to manage. But here she was, just doing this in her little space, and giving produce away as she could to churches or neighbors, and so that's the kind of story that I really love, discovering when somebody is doing something crazy. And just kind of, it's not even that it's selfless, because my sense from her was that what else am I going to do? This is what I have to do. I'm going to do this now. Those are the stories that I love best. Let's start with the bike tours through the parks, which was just kind of, I think it was an idea that our former park superintendent had taken from somewhere else and proposed to me. For 2 years, I guess, it's just been 2 years. We've done 2 or 3 bike tours through the summer, from park to park, and it's been an opportunity for me to begin to do a little bit of research into park history, and therefore into neighborhood history. There's never enough time to do as much of that kind of research as one would like, but I get a little bit of history out of my research. But then what becomes really fun is when there are people who come on these tours. Sometimes it's just 5, sometimes it's 12 or 15, I think was the most that we had. When some of those people who are in the tour come along and say, well, I know this about this park, and you begin to add, or I begin to add a little bit to the history that I'm collecting. On a bike tour through a park, it's hard to record that history other than kind of in my own mind, so maybe we need to figure out a way to bring a recorder or recording device or something along, to capture some of the other stories that come out. And again, not that every story needs to be captured. Sometimes it's just the oral moment, where people are standing around reminiscing, and me and the other people who are present realize that there are all these different ideas about this park and experiences of this park and of this place. And we're talking about it, and when has such a conversation ever occurred before? So that it's a real privilege then to be a part of something like that, even if those tidbits don't necessarily get recorded in a historical way. So that's been a lot of fun to be able to offer those tours and be a part of those. So then, another instance you mentioned was the tree videos, which we did. Man, has that been 2012 already since that was done, I think, or 13? No. Yeah? I can't quite believe that. And that was something that came out of the tree inventory analysis that we had done in 2011, where we'd inventoried all of our public trees, 12,000 plus trees, and gleaned all of this information about the ecological benefits of those trees, which we'd never seen before. And we're trying to make sense of it and trying to get this incredible story out about the great good that these trees are doing. With that inventory, we were looking at I think it was $1.12 million in annual benefits that these trees were creating, were passing along to the city. So it was a big story, and at about the time that we were finishing the inventory analysis, we landed this other huge grant. That's a story in itself. To plant, well, it was a $100,000 grant to plant trees in Goshen, and there needed to be a public awareness campaign component, and so that would be paid for in this grant. And so that's how the video idea came about. Well, so we've got the information that is ready to be disseminated, and now we've got a funding source for disseminating it. Let's figure out how we're going to do this. So we worked with 5 Core Media at the college to build the story out of the information that we had, and then craft the videos. And so, the story that's encapsulated in those videos then is has fed directly into the civic identity story that I've also been crafting. I mean, because the ecological, economic, and social value of the trees as portrayed in the videos is something that has been handed to us by folks 50, 60, 80, 100 years in the past, before there were tools, maybe even before there was awareness of the kind of value that we now appreciate, that we can now narrow in on in our trees. There was certainly aesthetic, and aware of the aesthetic value of these trees 80, 100 years ago. But we have received this incredible gift from people who didn't even realize what it was that they were giving to us. And so an important part of the story that is portrayed in the videos, and that I'm trying to fill out in the civic identity story, is that since we have received an incredible gift, we need to be preparing a gift to pass along to those who are going to come after us. Again, not knowing what the value of that will be to them, but knowing and sensing and feeling in our own moment the tremendous gift that it has been to us, and trusting that it will be to those who come along after. Maybe that's the heart of the story for me. That's at the heart of it. Both are really, really important, and I don't feel that I'm always on top of both of them, or I should say that I don't know that I always do a good job of representing them equally, or allowing the macro story and the micro story to kind of illuminate each other as well as I should, because it's really, really important to do that. I mean, we spend most of our lives, most of our days living in our micro story. I know I do, and in the micro story, you can feel like about all you can manage is just to kind of react and run around and react some more and then keep running. And you need the macro story then to kind of help to see what are these forces, or what are the pressures, what are the pieces that are kind of moving around. So to go back to the story of the American elm tree, which is a micro story. It's an individual tree, and a family in particular that has lived underneath that tree I don't know, 40 years, maybe close to 50 years. No longer anymore. So that property was sold, and that's why the tree came down. A micro story. The macro story has to do with Dutch elm disease, which is a fungus that was accidentally introduced into North America in the 1920s, 30s, and slowly worked its way across the United States, killing American elm trees, 100, 10,000 at a time, 1 million at a time, year by year, until most of them are gone. And so that's a story of globalization. Before globalization had a name, really, because it was trade. It was transatlantic trade that accidentally brought this fungus over, and so the macro story helps me, and I would hope helps others to appreciate what is so significant about the loss of this one very large, very old survivor American elm tree. What was so unique about it in our community, which was a uniqueness that was not properly appreciated, in my opinion. I don't know whether a proper appreciation might have saved it. And part of what I'm warning is that I didn't do a good job of bringing this to the attention of the current property owners. So I'm implicated. But having the macro story and the micro story helps to see more clearly what's at stake, even in an individual tree, as in that case. And one way to talk about that, I think, is the fact that for a lot of people, again, there's maybe an intrinsic appreciation of a tree and its beauty, which I can argue is maybe the most important thing about the tree. But for a community like a city that has to count every penny and nickel and dime and account for them, when you can bring the quantitative value of a tree to the city council, for instance, or to a business owner, and say there are these economic values embodied in this tree or in the trees that we are proposing to be planted. And if you keep telling that story and backing it up with good data, slowly shifts occur, and I feel like that's what I see happening in Goshen, is that people who once upon a time would have said, "What, the value of a tree?" What? Now say, the value of a tree. Not everybody. I mean, it's work that has to continue, and that's something that I find myself constantly reminded by, because there'll be a conversation where somebody says, "Whatever." So working at the hard numbers is important, but then also backing around or circling back around to the quality experience, the qualitative experience of living with trees. Again, those two things have to speak to each other in equal ways. I don't want to take our urban forest apart to the point that it is just a bunch of parts and pieces, because it has to be the sum as well. I can think of several instances where people, in particular with silver maples, were ready to take these trees down. Silver maples can be messy, yes, but they're also extremely tenacious and tough, and they produce a lot of shade, especially as they mature. I can think of several occasions where people wanted to have some large silver maples taken down, street trees, that were really in good shape. There was work that needed to be done with them, without a doubt. But in looking at their overall quality, and then talking with these people about the benefits that they were receiving from these trees, especially the shade benefit as expressed through cooling costs in the summer. Talk to them about, well, if we take this tree down, you're exposing yourself on the south and the west to blasting summer heat, and in those conversations, there's a shift, and at least in a number of those conversations, people were clearly convinced, no, let's work with the tree. Let's clean it up and work with it. And so I see that. I see that happening. I mean, there are so many people. That's what I'm thinking about. Some of the people that I think of most immediately are like Melissa Kingsley, who no longer lives here in the community, but the work that she started with river quality measuring back in 2009, 10. Has a legacy that continues. I mean, so that water testing is still happening through the college now, and she started some environmental programs, outdoor educational programs too, that we continue to offer at the Reese Center. So I think about someone like her. Jason Kaufman and Dustin Saylor in the engineering department, particularly water quality management and stormwater coordinating. Those are just kind of stunning things to try to get a handle on. And I don't know, maybe they would tell you that they don't have a handle on them, but from my perspective, they have done incredible work, to help the city, all of us, manage our water in wonderful ways. Sure, there's lots of work to do still, and I'm sure that they would say that. But compared to where we were 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, I find that work really, really inspiring. Those are some things that come off the top of my head. There was a kid that who came to me from, and this is 7 or 8 years ago, probably more like 9 or 10 years actually. A kid who came to me from the trustee's office. He'd gotten in trouble, and he needed to do some restitution work. And so there was one morning where he and a couple other guys and I were out in the woods, back in the classified forest, and there are mounds of rubber tailings that were dumped there in the 40s and 50s probably. This is stuff that would have come out of some of the rubber factories back by the river before there was good regulation, and the forest has since kind of grown up over these. And this kid, who's a year or two out of high school, as we were working through the forest, taking out invasive species, he saw more and more of this, and he was just appalled. Big earrings and tattoos, you know, he's a tough. But as we worked through here, he was as we worked through the woods, he was just more and more taken aback by what he was seeing. And the short story is that he organized a forest cleanup day. Got a bunch of his friends together and invited the community to come, and we had like 20 people one morning and took out 3, maybe 4 dump truck loads of trash on his initiative. That's a really great story to me. Somebody who saw something that was offensive and did something about it. So Willie Deegan is another person who I am very inspired by. I mean, he is the tree whisperer. Worked at the college for years and years. I think he has retired now, and took care of so many of the trees there. I think it would be really interesting to hear his story, hear his perspective. Well, and his son Dara in that right too. Again, back to water. Those would be good people. Krista Daniels would be another good person to talk to about some of these things. She's worked in the county park department for years, and has done great, especially interpretive work out there. I mean, the way I encounter it and see it is, most obviously the way I encounter it is in the kinds of volunteers that show up and contribute across the course of the year, but in particular moments too. I think about folks who come and volunteer to water the young trees that we've been planting across the city. So we commit to watering every tree that's planted in public space for at least 2 growing seasons. And right now we're planting it's closer to 400 trees a year. So that's a lot of trees, and it wouldn't happen, and therefore these trees would die outside of volunteers who come between May and September. Last year they watered 5 days a week, and we had 25 different volunteers in a rotation, so that they actually only had to water it was about once every 2 weeks. But we had so many that came to do this work and saw that it was important, that we're keeping our young trees alive. We've got a mortality rate that is between 2 and 3%, which is just fantastic. I've heard from the state level urban forestry coordinator, that she's kind of amazed, or she is amazed at how many trees are surviving year to year here, and it's because of volunteers. Our tree board is all volunteers. The Trees for Goshen folks, they're all volunteers. Our Arbor Day celebration is all volunteers who show up to put on a huge tree party, So that's an easy place that I can point to say common good is being expressed and lived. But also just, ordinary property owners who are interested in their trees and call me up to ask about them, and want to take care of one or have one planted or just plant one on their own, and recognizing that there is a personal benefit in having a tree and taking good care of it, But I also hear more and more, well, this tree, I won't get much from it, but the next person who lives here will. And so there's the common good.